South Asia Institute to this evening's panel discussion on understanding the Pakistan military. We have with us Dr. David Taylor, who's going to be chairing and moderating. I'm actually representing the South Asia Institute, and Dr. James Karan, who is the chair of the Pakistan Center here, wasn't able to make it today, so I'm sort of representing both the center and the institute as well. We have with us two speakers this evening. First of all, we have Dr. Farzana Sheikh, who is a specialist on Pakistan and in terms of the regional politics of South Asia more broadly. She was born in Pakistan, has a PhD from Columbia University, and is a former research fellow, Clare Hall, in Cambridge. She's published widely on Pakistan and South Asian Islam, and has held various university lectureships in the UK, the US, and Europe. We also have with us Dr. Ayesha Siddiqa, who completed her PhD not far from here at King's College in War Studies. She's been a Woodrow Wilson Fellow, a Ford Fellow, and a Charles Wallace Fellow at St. Anthony's College in Oxford. She is the author of two books on Pakistan's military. The first one was Pakistan's Arms Procurement and Military Build-Up in Search of a Policy, and of course Military Inc., which the new edition, which is just being released, and actually tonight I believe is the launch of the new edition, it's our honor to be able to do that here tonight as well. I'd also like to announce that Ayesha Siddiqa has also been recently appointed as a research associate at the South Asia Institute here at SOAS as well. And then finally, we have our distinguished chair, moderator, and my former teacher here at SOAS, Dr. David Taylor, who will be well known for many of you here. He completed his PhD in politics and from SOAS after studying at Cambridge and also doing area studies here at SOAS. Dr. Taylor was formerly vice provost at the Aga Khan University between 2002 and 2008. And before that, he was a faculty member at SOAS, where he held the posts of dean and then pro-director with responsibility for teaching. He's currently senior fellow at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies at the University of London and is the director of the Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilizations at the Aga Khan University here in London. So I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Taylor, and we look forward to the rest of the evening.
Well, thank you very much, and it's an honour and a privilege to have been asked by Tej to chair and moderate this evening's discussion. Indeed, I've been associated with SOAS for a long time, and Pakistan and India are core to the studies that take place at SOAS. And of course, as we look at Pakistan, a concern with the military has always been very much in people's minds. It's partly been there from area studies perspective, how to actually understand day-to-day events in Pakistan without understanding the military, where the military has come from, why it acts as it acts, how it affects Pakistan's stance in international as well as domestic affairs. But the role of the military in Pakistan has also precipitated theoretical thinking, in some cases positively towards the role of the military. I think of Samuel Huntington way back in the 1970s, but also negative, the idea of the garrison state, which has its origins in different countries, but certainly the Pakistan example seems to fit. And questions that are raised about all sorts of things, the cultural context in which military rule arises, the link between poor economic performance and lack of transformation of an economy and the role of the military. There are many different ways in which the Pakistan experience can be relevant. And we're going to hear this evening about one particular aspect of that, which is the penetration of the military in Pakistan, in particular, of course, the army, into the economy, and the way in which that has both reinforced the power of the army and perhaps weakened other potential sources of power. And it's a great pleasure to welcome my two colleagues, Ayesha Siddiqa, Dr. Ayesha Siddiqa, and Dr. Farzana Sheikh. And I was in Pakistan in 2007, as was mentioned, and I remember the shock, the amazement that was caused by the publication of the first edition of Military Inc. And I remember the stories that went around, which I'm sure were true, about the army attempting to buy up all the copies of the books in order to prevent it circulating, but of course that backfired, and it simply added to the prestige that the book has rightly enjoyed as a path-breaking study of its particular field. And perhaps we'll hear a bit more about that later. And I'm absolutely delighted that Ayesha has been able to produce a second edition on sale for a bargain price of £10 at the end, and I believe will be prepared to sign copies. So a signed copy, collector's item, yes, at a bargain price. So the programme for this evening is that I'm going to ask first of all Fazana Sheikh to speak about her views on the subject, and then to come to Ayesha Siddiqa to talk about her perspective and maybe a bit about the book. And I've asked each speaker to talk for 15 to 20 minutes, and then I will initiate a discussion, ask some questions, and then open the floor for more general questions and discussion. We aim to be finished by 6 o'clock. So, if I could turn to
Thank you, David. Thank you to the SOAS South Asia Institute, its Deputy Director, Dr. Navtej Purgal, who extended this invitation to me to speak on this occasion, and of course to Dr. James Curran in absentia, Chair of the Centre of the Study of Pakistan. So let me start by saying what a privilege it is here to take part in marking the publication of the second edition of Dr. Ayesha Siddiqa's groundbreaking study, Military Inc., which occupies a unique and, might I say, unrivaled place in the study of Pakistan's most powerful state institution, the military, especially its army. In his classic study of this powerful force, America's leading expert on the subject, Stephen Cohen, observed that, quote, "There are some armies that guard their nation's borders. There are others that are concerned with protecting their own position in society. And then there are those that defend a cause or an idea. The Pakistan Army does all three." This landmark study by Dr. Siddiqa, who ranks, I believe, as one of Pakistan's leading military analysts, brings to mind a similar analogy. There are some books that are recognized for their scholarship, others distinguished for their analysis, and those admired for the courage of their convictions. This book, by common consent, has been acclaimed for all three. Impressive in her command of the debates about civil-military relations and convincing in her explanation of the dynamics of Pakistan's politics, Ayesha's contribution is no less remarkable for its audacious expose of a military corrupted by its engagement in a predatory cycle of politics. As such, I think, she stands as a rare exception among scholars in Pakistan, where few have been prepared so openly to question the military's claim to act as a selfless and benevolent institution. That may explain why Ayesha now faces the wrath of the country's military-backed establishment, which has denied her access to public forums, threatened her with legal action, and, it is said, turned a blind eye to dangers to her physical security. None of this is likely, of course, to dampen the power of her meticulously researched argument. It rests on the proposition that Pakistan military's repeated intervention in politics has transformed it from a key state institution into a dominant economic class, driven by predatory impulses and the need to secure ever-expanding financial and business interests. This, Ayesha argues, has been sustained by an extensive internal economy she defines as milbiz, shorthand for military business, that has now entered the vocabulary of any one of us trying to track the Pakistani military's involvement in every sphere of economic activity, ranging from real estate, industrial production, schools, hospitals, universities, and even bakeries. Its proceeds derive from what she says is military capital, used for the personal benefit of the military fraternity, especially the officer cadre. But free of standard accountability procedures, this profit-making enterprise has come to be judged by Pakistan's military as, quote, a naturally earned privilege. Now, to this potentially explosive claim, we must add another, elaborated at some length by Ayesha. It involves a parallel she draws between milbis and forms of tribute exacted by bandits in pre-modern societies, who commonly offered protection in exchange for economic gains. Indeed, one interpretation of milbis would be to regard it precisely as a reflection of what Ayesha would have us understand as Pakistan's enduring neo-feudal order. Now this, I believe, raises some important questions, both about the military's claim to represent a modernizing force, as well as suggested by some of its keenest supporters, the only meritocratic institution in a country otherwise beset by the twin evils of patronage and clientelism. For what Ayesha clearly demonstrates in her work is that the military, by relying upon civilian allies to ensure its all-powerful status, has itself become an active party in maintaining those very same traditional hierarchies of power in Pakistan that it claims to challenge. It is this that also explains the structural flaws of a system predisposed to authoritarianism, which has served the interests both of the military and its clients among the political classes in Pakistan. And while the idea has since gained some currency among other scholars of Pakistan, such as Christophe Chaffrelot, who has sought recently to deconstruct the paradox of Pakistan as a democracy without democrats, it is, I think, to Ayesha that we must give credit for being among the first systematically to challenge the received wisdom of civil-military relations in Pakistan as necessarily fraught with tension between, on the one hand, civilian democrats and on the other, military autocrats. Instead, she points to a symbiotic relationship between the two, a relationship in which politicians and other members of the ruling elite, such as big landowners and businessmen, support the military in return for personal favors. What keeps it in place, she argues, is an overarching national narrative, nurtured over decades by the military with the help of sections of the media and selected civil society partners who together have helped consolidate the military's so-called hegemony over Pakistani society, its politics, and its economy. The result, according to Ayesha, is that, quote, there is today hardly any cogent element in the country that could challenge the basis of the military's existence or its dominance of the state and society. This new edition of Military Inc., which I hope you will all buy, returns to this particular theme by showing us how the military's extended control over civilian spaces in Pakistan over many years has left it in the enviable position of being able to calibrate the exercise of power in ways that, even while seeming to herald a shift, have ensured the continued dominance of the military. The so-called democratic transition that witnessed the return of an elected government in 2007, followed in 2008, followed by a peaceful handover of power, the first of its kind, to another elected government in 2013, was hailed at home and in Western capitals abroad as milestones with the potential to break Pakistan's cycle of military rule. But this widely welcome shift, Ayesha warns, is no more than an adjustment in the pattern of power that, far from diminishing the influence of the military, has actually enhanced its standing. For while the threat of direct military government appears to have receded in Pakistan, it has been replaced with the strengthening of what she calls military-led governance, a formula that has ensured the military's monopoly over strategic decision-making without incurring the political cost of tarnishing the military's reputation or the international censure entailed in mounting a military coup. The military's new formula for power also appears to spell other changes. For with the military seemingly now less concerned with questions of political legitimacy of the kind that had beset military takeovers in the past, the standing of its erstwhile civilian partners, upon whom it had relied to shore up its legitimacy, appears to have sunk further. These clients, whether inside ruling parties or within sections of the opposition, now find themselves, as she describes so well in this new edition, in a state of perpetual, if not chronic uncertainty that threatens constantly to expose their weakness. But perhaps the greatest challenge brought on by the military's shift from government to governance, carefully detailed in this new edition of Military Inc., is the military's deadly embrace of Pakistan's media. Where once this heavily censored fourth estate barely registered among the military's key civilian partners, it has now emerged, newly emancipated and emboldened, as the military's most crucial collaborator in managing the military's image in ways that promise to continue securing the military's corporate interests. Although such collaboration has faltered occasionally, and at times indeed exacted a heavy price from the media, as with the killing and intimidation of journalists unwilling to endorse without question a military-friendly narrative, it is clear that the military in Pakistan regards its relationship with the media as presenting the greatest opportunity yet to promote its own vision of Pakistan's national security, to which its political and economic fortunes are ultimately tied. But at this point, we might well want to pause for thought. For although Ayesha would have us believe that the battle against military domination in Pakistan may well be lost, there are equally grounds to believe that resistance may have strengthened. Where once mainstream parties might have rushed to plead their case before the military in the event of a conflict with political rivals, the 2014 Islamabad sit-in, organized by Imran Khan's PTI, which aimed to oust an elected government with the active connivance of the military, clearly had few takers in parliament and among the political classes. Instead, Pakistan witnessed a rare spectacle, which saw political parties once deeply implicated in shoring up military regimes choose to opt for something resembling parliamentary sovereignty, however feeble this idea in Pakistan's history. And while sections of Pakistan's media may well be readily co-opted to promote a military-friendly narrative, Pakistan's liberalized media, I believe, is much more diverse and combative than I think Ayesha sometimes allows. It is certainly true that many of Pakistan's institutions remain weak and potentially vulnerable to manipulation by the military. At the same time, there have been signs of a shift that suggest that even once most politically compromised of Pakistan's state institutions, the judiciary has undergone something of a change. perhaps best represented in recent years by a trend in favor of what has commonly come to be known as judicial activism. And although unquestionably prone at times to adopt the language of populism, such judicial activism has without doubt, to my mind at least, also helped check some of the worst excesses associated with the military and its intelligence agencies against political dissidents in Pakistan. So I'd like to end here by saying that what I see, perhaps in contrast to the stark picture before us in Ayesha's otherwise remarkable book, is of a Pakistan which, far from having surrendered to military authoritarianism, may well be poised to intensify the struggle to regain popular rights. I'll just leave it there.
Thank you very much for putting us off on exactly the right note and raising some of the key questions that I'm looking forward to hear Dr. Siddiqa and indeed the audience tackle later on. So could I ask Dr. Ayesha Siddiqa to speak?
Thank you, David. I'm grateful to Deputy Director of South Asia Institute at SOAS, Dr. Navteej Purval, James Caron, and SOAS in general for giving me this opportunity to speak here today and also to launch the second edition. When the first book was launched, I remember after a few months of a harrowing experience, somebody asked me about somebody was looking for a book agent, and I said, well, in my case it was perhaps the military, which I seem to hire every time this book comes out. It happened yet again. But let me, this experience that I've recently had of a social media and media campaign being launched against me for reasons unbeknown to me, what angered them, where did anyone cross the line. I think this is what, in a way, I was writing about. And instead of looking at it as a work against the military, I always try to contradict when people say it's a book against the military. I say no, it's a book analyzing one of the most important secondary role of the military, which is its economy, which has grown almost bigger than its primary role of defending the frontiers of the state. And the problem is that these different roles have become so enmeshed that it's very difficult now to untangle these roles and say, all right, here is where its role as protector of the state, territorial integrity of the state ends, and this is where its secondary role begins. And I think it is important for scholarship and for social science, for academia in any country to examine the powerful institutions of the state. And this is what I've tried to do in that book. Not pull punches, but basically to examine what role does it play, where does it figure out, and if we have a very serious civil-military relations imbalance, which it is, then how do you counter that powerful institution? And in order to understand that, in order to find answers to that, I think it's very important to understand its extent of its power. And my argument, one of my primary arguments is that in Pakistan, the economic role of the military is enmeshed with its political role is enmeshed with its economic role. In fact, economic power is an extension. Now, what has happened since 2007, and I think that, which is one of the reasons for a need for a second edition, was to understand that how has this military expanded? What is its character? What is its nature? I mean, is it just a political player? Is it just an economic player and nothing else? And one of the new arguments that I'm making, which has been questioned rightly by Dr. Farzana Sheikh, and you know, this is a debate which one needs to have. My argument is that it's in these last 10 years, or since the first edition, it's been a decade, little more than a decade. Military is not just a state actor now. It has evolved in a societal actor. It has influence over the national narrative. And not only that, it has a dominant control over, it's evolved a new national discourse, which then plugs some of the main holes that from a security perspective they had. Because the battle that has been gone on since Pakistan's creation is that for the military, there is something which makes them very uncomfortable about civilian politicians and civilians in general. I mean, many of the people who are present here from Pakistan have often come across this, of being, of this term of bloody civilians or civvies, civilians being looked down upon. But I think it's that term itself is an extension of an understanding in the part of the military that they are the ones who understand where lie the interests of Pakistan as a state and how it needs to be protected. And unless you're part of the institution, unless you're beholden to that institution, you cannot represent those interests. And this used to, this was going on. There would be those battles off and on. You would have 10 years of martial law and 10 years of civilian government, and the gears would switch and from one to the other. Now my argument is that since 2000s, the major shift happened in 2000s, mid-2000s. And that shift was moving from a model of military government, instead of taking control of the government every 10 years. It would control governance. It would have greater influence over governance. Now that doesn't rule out that the military would actually at some point in time decide to take control, come and take control if it's very disturbed. Yet, the probability that, now you could even take that as a positive movement and say that, all right, there is an arrangement that it would continue to dominate policies, major policies of the state through its civilian partners. So there is more of a civil-military partnership that we see. Earlier on, when that would get disrupted, I mean, there would always be a civil-military partnership. Not that that partnership has not been there. I mean, whenever military has come into power, because of the need for political legitimacy, it has sought out civilian actors. So the last martial law of Musharraf, for instance, it immediately built a linkage with political parties or political players that were otherwise known to be very corrupt, yet brought into the governance equation, because who else would you depend on? I mean, if you do not want to engage the entire military into everyday running of the state, then you have to go through its partners. And that's what it did. Yet, the nature of that partnership, that's my argument, has changed, it's shifted. So that's one. The other is that in this period, what they tried to do was expanded the media. I mean, mid-2000s is also the period when the media expanded. I mean, if you remember, many of us will remember that. And the first battle that you had with the so-called independent media was between Musharraf, General Musharraf, and the media, this new born media, expanded media. Today, Pakistan has 86 channels, there are several radio networks, there is a cinema, film industry, and there is theatre. So there's a burgeoning media industry. But what has happened is somewhere, through machination, the military has struggled to dominate that narrative behind the scenes. And so, I mean, I'm one of those people who writes in Pakistani newspapers. And this has happened in the last 2-3 years. What has happened is that from a time when you'd sit down and happily write 1,000 words piece in an hour, get it over done with in an hour. Now it's a struggle every week because there is what you call self-censorship. There's greater influence in newsrooms, which was never the case before. There's greater influence, there's greater control in newsrooms and television, and of course now there is an expansion even in the social media. I mean, one was very happy and thought, all right, this media is controlled, let's forget about it, there is independent means of communicating, at least to a certain group of people through social media. But when you have a system where 17,000 ISPR or the intelligence agency runs 17,000 different social media accounts, it can actually overnight muddy your reputation and tell stories that nobody can imagine telling that powerfully. Control imagination. I mean, in the past 15 days, what I've seen from creating a new husband for me to so many things, it's just been very imaginative. So that is capturing the narrative. That is having the tools and the power. And I'm not saying that people are not fighting back. There isn't resistance. I think one of the beauties of Pakistan, and we would take pride in it. I mean, Pakistan was not Fox, Pakistani media. I mean, there were always those segments. But Pakistan wasn't Fox, Pakistan wasn't India's media. We were more robust. I mean, I've grown up as a youngster during the 1980s, Zia's martial law, when people did show a lot of resistance. There was censorship, and there would be days when entire pages would be blank to show that news was censored. So there was resistance. People have suffered. And people have suffered because in 1980s, what has also shifted in Pakistan, which extends the military's power, is that as an imagination, it has become very powerful. So 1980s, going back to 1980s, Ziaul Haq days, the state, was oppressive. It was a martial law. It picked you up. There were censorship laws. You'd disappear. All of that happened. But it was the state which came after you. So that way the lines were drawn. You knew if you were put in jail, if you were taken to the Atak fort, you knew it was a state. Now what has happened in the past decade or more is that in terms of expanding its partnership, the state has also outsourced its violence to its partners. So you're no longer sure if the person who pulled the trigger, if he's a proxy, or somebody, just operating independently. There are multiple partnerships, and in order to capture the narrative, these partnerships have been built across not just the political divide, but also the ideological spectrum. So the religious right or the militant right is as much connected with the state as is the liberal left. Everybody has their own reason. So what has happened is that the element of resistance, number one, has reduced. And secondly, what has become dominant is a new narrative, the imagination of Pakistan. Perhaps not the people sitting in this room, but the upcoming middle class, or the new middle class, or the new youth. I mean, the new phenomenon about Pakistan is this large number of youths who have joined the body politic and who have joined the discourse, were part of it, and who now believe that in a more patriotic, I mean, for them, patriotism and nationalism has been defined and redefined in totally a different way. When in 1980s people questioned the military, we did not consider ourselves crossing a line as far as Pakistani nationalism is concerned. You did it because you thought you had a stake in the state and you had a right to challenge an institution. Now that institution has tried to become the state and the voice of the society itself. And it has permeated. And what I find dangerous, and I think questionable, is that over years they have tried to capture sources of narrative making. They've captured the sources where narratives are generated, where minds evolve. I mean, for example, the British universities are not kind of, they do not, they're not free from that influence. And this is not something new. I mean, the American CIA had once done it during the 1960s. So intelligence agencies do it. It's nothing exceptional. It's nothing new. But it has come to Pakistan differently, in a way that now the national narrative is being captured. So if you talk about Balochistan, you become a raw agent. If you discuss any other issue, for example, the kind of conversations that happen. I mean, I'll just give you a very crude example. I mean, just 2 days ago, there was this attack on these Ahmadis in Jakwal. And if you watch the conversation that is happening, I mean, the conversation is, oh, but, it happens in India too. But we're talking about Pakistan. So it's like a narrative which is meant to block that conversation. I mean, we were very happily being nationalists and patriotic, and then somebody entirely changed the syllabus, the curriculum of how nationalism should look like. And for me, that is the major concern. And it's important. I mean, I still believe that a definitive book on Pakistani military has not been written as yet. There are several books on Pakistani military, from Cohen to Shuja Nawaz to others. Yet, where does its heart beat? How does its mind function? It's so powerful. And it's so connected. Now it's become connected. And as Dr. Farzana Sheikh rightly pointed out, I've written it in my first edition, and I've kind of extended that argument even further in the second edition, that I do not consider the political class as being totally separate from the military. They are an extension. I mean, what has happened, where my heart sinks, is that if you look at the political movement in Pakistan, none has succeeded without pat on the back from the military. But from that standpoint, from that power to extending, its foothold in the society. I mean, these past 3 years, for example, was a massive messiah moment. What I call the Walter Mitty moment for Pakistan, in which we thought that, one army general is going to take away and get rid of corruption. These are real problems. I mean, the corruption is rampant in Pakistan. There's people doing it. And I'm not even arguing here that the political class or politicians are not corrupt. In fact, in our entire system has seeds of corruption. Yet, to build a narrative and to imagine that there is one institution which holds the key to cleaning that country is a very powerful message to be circulating in the society, which then kind of pushes back all kind of conversations that one needs to have on, how do you counterbalance, how do you build institutions. And one last point is that, of course, all this political, all this capturing of narrative, of course, then hides the fact about the economy itself, about the military economy itself. And what I've noticed in this period, in these last 10 years, 12 years, is that with that extension of power, what happens is that then the level of extortion becomes much more criminal. And there are several cases of how people have been picked up, several cases of how real estate, which is one of the big things in Pakistan, if nothing works, real estate does. On how that real estate mafia then gets connected with part of the military economy. And, and these are things that despite, and I think one last point is that as a scholar working, for my country, working for, as rightfully as a social scientist, I think it's my right to investigate the power of this institution, and also to see that how does this power help or damage the institution itself. I think there is no doubt that every country would want to have a military, so does Pakistan. But what should its role be is a question which needs to be asked. And if the narrative has been shifted away from it, then I think this is the time to ponder about it.
No.
Thank you so much.
There are still a few seats in the front if people would like to come and take a seat. Oh, before we start the questions, I'd just like to acknowledge that courageous statement from Ayesha Siddiqa, I think expressing very eloquently what many of us have seen as being the characteristics of the Pakistan state, the Pakistan army, and the Pakistan experience. And I'm equally delighted to have had Zama Sheikh putting everything into context and telling us something about the qualities of this work. We've talked a lot about the military, and that of course is quite right, because people see the military as an actor in Pakistan, an actor that has become a societal actor that has had this power, this ability to create a national narrative. And I'd like to sort of ask our two speakers to elaborate on that a little, because of course the army is made up ultimately of 500,000-600,000 individuals, some tens of thousands of officers and many men who are recruited into the ranks, a few women as well, but mostly men. It's a very masculine narrative, of course, that has been generated. But have there been any significant shifts in the last 30 or 40 years? If I had been writing 30 or 40 years ago, I would probably have talked quite a lot about the Punjab and the army as a Punjabi institution. but does that particular stereotype still hold, or have there been significant changes? Is the notion of the link, the integral link between the masculinity of the Punjab soldier and the idea of the military valor of the army, does that still hold, or have there been changes? And if I could also go back a long way to the late lamented Hamza Alavi, who wrote in one of his articles about the changes in the social composition of the officer corps and the induction of lower middle class urbanites with different ideologies, and it seems to me that their ideology now, maybe 20 or 30 years later, has been at the core of the new narrative that has been emerging. So I don't know if you'd like to comment on that.
Well, I think both these questions are absolutely vital to our understanding of the military. I think I'm one of those, David, who has had difficulty with conceiving of the military as a monolithic organization. And I'm talking about it now as an institutional force. We know, for example, and I think Ayesha has certainly alluded to it both in this book and elsewhere in her own work, about the tensions between the services, for example. I mean, the army is clearly top dog. The Navy sees itself very much as the underdog. There are tensions between the services, but there are also tensions within the army. And I think one of the difficulties here is that, of course, we are faced with a monumental lack of transparency when it comes to understanding exactly how Pakistan's military works. The military guards this sort of information very jealously. I mean, for example, I don't know, Ayesha, perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, the army is also unwilling to share and release in the public domain, let's say, patterns of recruitment. Just, I mean, we all assume that it's a Punjabi-dominated army. But, you know, I mean, we would like to know, for example, exactly what sort of recruitment is being made from different parts of Pakistan. And that information, as far as I know, is not in the public domain. As far as the social composition of the army is concerned, there too, of course, we all suspect and speculate that there have been significant changes. Yes, the army, and Steve Cohen, of course, gave us the different stages of the army, the Western educated, US educated senior military officer with a certain taste for whiskey in the officers' mess, presenting a very sharp contrast to the kind of officer who was commissioned after the 1980s, under Zia, and those who came to rule the roost later on. And while those changes are very much visible at the top levels, perhaps, even at the lower levels, we have had indications, but really no substantive research that we can get our teeth into about shifts, about more recruitment being drawn from, let's say, more deprived sections of Pakistan's population, more deprived sections, let's say, of the Potawar Plateau. We know that there were changes in 1971 when, with the reputation of the army being tarnished, it was simply no longer being able to attract the kind of recruitment that it once did, where to be a member of the armed forces was considered to be a matter of status and honor. That too was eroded. But I'm not sure whether we really have enough material to hand to make any kind of informed judgment about those sorts of changes. And some of them, of course, changes which have a very direct bearing on our lives today, because, of course, here I refer to the speculation about Pakistan's military becoming an increasingly Islamized military. We speculate about this. but to what extent, can we really ground our assumptions on fact?
Thank you. See, the one basic problem with recruitment to civil service and military in Pakistan is that it's not based on ethnicity, but on your domicile, which is a document of, which is registering your birth. And it's the base of your family. You can have property somewhere and then your domicile, you could get your domicile from there. In mid-2000s again, that is where we see a shift, an organizational shift happening, at least in terms of claims. They said, we're going to bring that balance in the military. And if you've seen, I'm sure you have, Shuja Nawaz's work with Christine Fair, in which the claims were that the recruitment pattern is shifting away and there's going to be increase. And earlier on, when I did my study in 2007, there was 0.3% of recruitment from Balochistan, 71 to 75% from Punjab, then you have Sindh. Now, 20%, or 15% from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and then, again, very small portion from Sindh. Now, and part of what recruitment from Punjab used to be from the Potohar. Now that pattern probably is shifting more towards central Punjab. So central Punjab is also in the conversation. Gujranwala, I believe, the previous army chief and the current army chief, the new army chief are from Gujranwala, which I consider central Punjab, not North Punjab. So there is that mix which has happened within Punjab. But the dominant, amongst the officer cadre, the dominant class remains, the mixture of Chakwal, Jhelum, that belt. In fact, that belt is termed in military language as a Bermuda Triangle, which means that if you're up against, in the service, if you're up against one of the people, then, you'll run out of luck. And what had happened again during Musharraf days was there was about 80,000 people inducted into the army, lower ranks, not higher ranks, but lower ranks from Sindh. That was a period there were no jobs, and also there was a conversation going on within Sindh, at least the Sindhi intellectuals, arguing that if you can't beat them, join them. Meaning that, all right, you can't keep fighting, because 1980s, Sindh was one province which had really suffered under the Zia martial law. So the new conversation was amongst Sindhi intellectuals, for some of them, not entirely, but some of them was, all right, let's be part of them, let's join the military. And I say that these are not 80,000 individuals who joined, these are 80,000 extended families. And that had an impact on how people thought. And what we've seen, again, going back to changing of narrative, just diverting a bit, what I've seen in happening in Sindh in the last, again, 10, 12 years is you have a proliferation of, you have this factor along with proliferation of madrasas. And that combined has begun to affect the social fabric, the social narrative in Sindh. And that's what's happening in other parts as well. But the dominant, what you were referring to as Punjab being the military, where the military class comes from, and that being, the fighters, that mythology still remains, and it's kept up. And that's part of what is the common belief.
just ask one more question before opening it up then. This idea of the national narrative, sort of almost a Gramscian reading of it. Where are the factories? Where is the place where these narratives are manufactured and polished and refined? Is it? And where are the links outside? Are there gurus, if I can use the word, from outside the military who nevertheless have a major impact on military thinking?
Actually, you should be the one, because this is very much your argument,
yes,
that there is a narrative that's being consolidated and promoted.
Is it the military academies? Is it the messes? Or where
See, I think, well, one is that, and this is, where Aqil Shah's work, which Farzana is also seen very carefully. That's where, Aqil Shah and part of Pristine Fair's latest works come in, that there's actually a whole mindset that is developed within the military academies, but that's one portion. What I'm arguing is a totally separate portion, which is the interaction between military and its civilian partners. Because that partnership is, it's very comfortable, it's very strong. You have people who have argued, for example, if you're looking at narratives which dominate. I mean, for example, the narrative which came from the argument, made by, and which is very popular amongst the military. The argument made by, for example, Malia Lodi, who's Pakistan's ambassador now in the UN. I mean, her idea was that Pakistan has an image problem, not an imagination problem. And basically, if you improve that image, if, for example, media stopped reporting things, the bad things, if people stop talking about the bad things, then things will improve. Pakistan is as normal a country as anybody. So while you improve the image, you do not actually deal with the structural flaws that are there. And, many of the Pakistanis would disagree and say that, there are some structural flaws that we have to work on. Nobody's talking about destroying Pakistan, but about correcting those flaws. We need to have that conversation between civil and military, for example. We not only need a balance, we need a conversation, a very intense conversation.
Can I just come in there briefly? Ayesha, one question I'd like to put to you is that if it is the case that we are moving from military government to military-led governance, where it would seem that questions of legitimacy, such as were needed to shore up military regimes in the past, have become less pressing, why would the military still need civilian partners? I mean, surely now, from, if we go with your analysis, the need for civilian partners has become much less relevant. The military can manage on its own, as long as it, of course, has, media working in tandem with it. But in terms of that sort of extended network of civilian partners that you spelled out in the first edition, and which remain the core of your book, do you see any shift there? I mean, have we now, moved to a stage where really those civilian partners have become less important? And if so, where does that leave us? I mean, does it make any sense at all to talk about a democratic transition in Pakistan? Or should we simply just abandon this idea?
See, I think we would talk about a democratic transition because that is the natural course that a lot of civilians, at least you and I, would definitely want to have in Pakistan. Now, what I'm trying to perhaps highlight is that it's becoming more tricky and difficult. I'll explain, a couple of things. You see, firstly, as the society Islamizes, I mean, there are a lot of things which are happening on the parallel, not just one thing. as society Islamizes, which again, one of its core source is, when you keep partnering with it, the state partners with it, when an important institution of the state partners with religious entities, there is a certain level of legitimacy. But what is important is that their discourse is suddenly, you see so much commonality in that discourse in which democracy is actually a very redundant concept and institution. So the supra framework, the ideological framework of the state itself, then you see reflections of that delegitimacy there. Now, I'm not saying that, and again, the thing is, it's an evolving thing. We don't know where we're going, how far are they taking us. Now, we've been through this phase of 3 years in which the constant narrative was the leaders are corrupt, they're redundant, we perhaps don't need them, we want to kind of correct the system and all of that. Yet, what we see is that in order to have that legitimacy of, which political actors have in a very different way, the military kept shifting its gears from one to the other. So they would go and seek partnership with PTI, but parts of it would go seek partnership with a new evolving PPP, which is the new thing, and also segments of the political parties themselves, of PMLN. So that thing operated. Now, I think one of the things which perhaps stops them from coming in, and one of the reasons why they've shifted their gear from government to governance, is also because in order to keep semblance of a strong professional institution, they don't want to dig their heels with the entire institution like it happened in Latin America. And therefore, what you saw was much more rampant conflict with the society and between the society and the military. Now, what happens in Pakistan is selective violence. For example, there'll be conflict in Balochistan. There will be conflict in Okara. In fact, one of the things which has changed in these 10 years is in 2007, there was a movement in Okara, and it was reported in 2015, 14, 15, 16, people have died in Okara, have been shot dead, and yet it's barely made it to the middle pages of a couple of newspapers. We don't hear about it. So that in order to have that, create an aura of legitimacy, it's very important that they dig their heels, and it's a segment which deals with segment of the top leadership, which then deals with and has this constant either toing and froing between the political class. It doesn't extend to the entire institution. And what you said earlier, let me get back to you, about the military not being a monolith. I don't think I would want to suggest it's a monolith, and there are a lot of arguments which go on inside it. We see conflict, and we see that the institution weakens in a very different way because of that conflict. Because there are power centers, because what the economic building up of the economic empire, for example, means that once you retire, for example, when you retire as Director General ISI, you get 8 different properties as a result. Now, it means that every escalation in the ladder means some rewards for you, greater rewards, economic rewards. Now, because of that, there is a kind of a gentle infighting which does happen to reach to those top positions, and we see some of that argument actually coming out, not very in a very ugly way, but some of it we do kind of, if you were attuned to listening to, you hear it. But what it does manage to do is that keep its semblance of a monolith. The officers and the Jawans are tied together. And the benefit, of course, then of that kind of an image is that it manages to then negotiate with the civilian partners, which will remain there. And part of the problem is because they're so intertwined that you can keep talking about the corruption, you can delegitimize them, and you can also encourage them constantly not to deviate from how they conduct their business. So it becomes more cyclic than kind of a linear trajectory. I hope it makes sense.
Right, so I'd like to open it up to questions. I suspect there are going to be quite a lot. So I suggest, although we've got 20 minutes, that we take 3 questions at a time and ask our panelists to respond. So there's one there, and one here. So, sir. And please keep your questions reasonably brief.
Good evening. Amar Nainhart, Department of War Studies, King's College. My question is to you, Dr. Ayesha. How is the Indian factor building up the insecurity of the Pakistani army? And I think the insecurity of India is an idea which even Mr. Hussain Haqqani has spoken in his book, Pakistan Between Mosque and Medina. So could you please throw some light on India's insecurity for the Pakistani?
Thanks very much.
I just want to clarify a point about the social media that Dr. Siddiqui made. You said something about 17,000 social media sites.
Yeah, accounts.
Could you just clarify what you were saying there, please?
And then our third question in the front.
Thank you very much. I think, again, congratulations for this second edition. Army particularly, I am from Balochistan. My name is Shahjahan Baloch. And we have been resisting this army. So that's why there is no Baloch in Baloch regiment. Secondly, that requires demilitarization. And how do you see the role of nationalist political forces in restoring this democratic values which you were talking about?
Well, your question about the India factor, of course, it's the primary factor, and as I think what Pakistan military's biggest friend is Narendra Modi. What he's done is he has kind of caught up to the army's game, and he's playing something which is similar. What it has done, in fact, is strengthen the army's image. Something which resonates in the minds of ordinary people in Pakistan is the Gujarat carnage. You can't force people or can't make them think away about Narendra Modi away from that image. And therefore, it is much more difficult for the Pakistani Prime Minister to sell Modi in Pakistan than for Pakistani military to sell Modi in their way. So that does play a role, and has always historically played a role. But now, in formulation of a new nationalism, the shadow of Narendra Modi is very much there, and that will determine how also how civil military partnership will play out.
So do you think Narendra Modi negotiating with the Pakistani military will play some role in the Kashmir issue, or because as of now the government is only negotiating with the civilian in Pakistan? So do you think at least back channeling of information with the Pakistani army will bring some the Kashmir issue?
Well, perhaps, Farzana Sheikh would disagree with it. I've written about it, and my suggestion was, because at one point in time when General Pasha was the DGISI, he did go to the Indian High Commission in Islamabad and try to convey this message that, look, we are interested in a conversation, have conversation with us. I don't think that this is a point. I mean, I think conversation between Pakistan and India is important. It's good for regional stability. We can't. Every moment of lack of conversation does push us towards greater possibility of violence and greater possibility of a nuclear showdown between the two countries. The possibility of even accidental something should make us very nervous. But I don't think that we're in a mood at the moment to have that conversation. It's a point in which both sides are trying to assess what are their thresholds and what are their strengths. But I think it's better that they both return to the table. So 17,000 accounts. These are 17,000, at least 17,000 social media accounts, which are constantly there. So if the military today in Pakistan is one of the biggest financier of films. It runs a radio network which is second to Radio Pakistan. It finances theaters. So there are a lot of things have evolved since 2007. Now, what happens in social media is that if a film is made which is financed by the military, then you have people clicking on, what the IMDb, and there will be several followers. They can make it popular, at least on social media. If they want to tarnish your image within hours, within 24 hours, your reputation will be muddied. I remember I compared 2007. I was declared a traitor for writing the book, but a hero and a traitor. Today I'm a traitor and a traitor. So that's what these accounts do, because social media is very powerful, and to want to use it, I think that desire to control that narrative, to interject with their version and do it very strongly. It's like, how can you fight the state? I mean, you and I can sit down and kind of respond to a tweet. We can ask our friends to respond. We can put many things on the Facebook. But here we're talking about a state organization doing it. Very powerful. Nationalist forces. Depending on where we're talking about. For example, if you look at nationalist forces in Sindh, they're totally different. And nationalist forces in Sindh have, some of them have been very carefully brought over. None of them is strong enough to fight the social transformation. And I think that's the same problem that you have to some extent in Balochistan. Now, yet Balochistan is a very different war. And I think what the internationalizing of this conflict has done is perhaps secured the national elements. Yet, how it's received in rest of Pakistan. Rest of Pakistan, unfortunately, so blinded about what happens in Balochistan. There's almost a total media blackout as far as Balochistan is concerned. You have, apart from CPEC, what happens there, nobody knows. So that's, partly my question to what nationalist forces are doing. I think the other is that the ability of the state to block that content is then compounded with the problem that nationalist forces create themselves also. I mean, for example, once upon a time, Poonam, which is, this organization, the Party for Repressed National Movements, was a force. Not a force to reckon with, but yet it was part of the conversation. Now it's no longer there, which doesn't strengthen any national movement anymore.
Question back, and then there. So.
I'm quite interested in the notion of Pakistan as a sort of frontier society. I think that was been something at one stage during the talks. I mean, frontier societies are inherently more militaristic. Is that a naive point of view to say that in fact it's understandable the military would play a larger role in a frontier society?
My question is regarding the non-state actors that have been known to be facilitated by the military. The new chief, Khamer Javed Bajwa, he said that he'd vowed to, recently said in the news that he'd vowed to sever militants from their facilitators. Do you think that's going to be possible with him, or do you place any stock in that?
I was wondering if you could throw some light on two other trends in Pakistan. One is the emergence of middle class, and the other is which is a worldwide trend, but especially in Pakistan, the decline of grassroots ideological politics. Can it be argued that, particularly in the debate space, in the digital and electronic media space, it's predominantly manned or women by urban middle class, which is predominantly from north central Punjab and Karachi, like that. If we consider media, digital media as electronic, print and electronic media as the fourth pillar of the state, of all the pillars in Pakistan, I think currently it's the most homogenic unit in terms of its social composition. And then what the impact of that is that these people are already willing converts. The military perhaps doesn't need to sort of force them to, they're already subscribed to the military's worldview. And secondly, those people that you talked about who were the front line of the resistance back in the days, in the 80s, maybe they are still there, it's just that they don't know how to deal with this emerging space, or the decline of grassroots and ideological politics has just weakened the links between people like yourself and those political parties or civil society.
I'll just respond very quickly, but obviously I'd like also to hear Ayesha. You know, this thing about the decline of ideological politics in Pakistan, I mean, of course we do have populist trends as represented best perhaps by Imran Khan and the PTI. But I think I would be a bit reluctant to argue that Pakistan has seen the end of ideological politics. If anything, it has seen a strengthening of ideological politics. It's just that it's not the kind of ideological politics we would like. I mean, the Taliban and their various offshoots all proceed with a strong ideological impulse. It's just that, it's the wrong kind of ideology, okay? So I certainly wouldn't go along with that. As far as the question about the frontier state is concerned, I think that's a valid point. The argument has, of course, also been made by the historian Ian Talbot that, the military's role in Pakistan has much to do with the fact that Pakistan was a security state, that it was designated as such by the British under colonial rule. But that has to be only one factor for the strength of the military. And I would not want to believe that that alone was in any way a determining factor, because there are simply far too many variables, from the weakness of political institutions, weakness of political parties, to wider geopolitical partnerships that Pakistan has forged, which has strengthened institutions such as the military. But Ayesha, perhaps you should have the last
Yep.
few minutes.
See, going back to your question about non-state actors, I mean, one hopes that that relationship is changed. It's very important for Pakistan, for Pakistani military to reevaluate its strategy. I think fighting India is one, and I'm not going to question whether we should or we shouldn't fight India. The question is, why in the process harm Pakistan itself? And that is what this partnership is doing. So I really wish General Bajwa luck and hope that he manages to do it, to bring about that change. And I think more importantly, there is an important, there's a reason why this relationship needs to be re-evaluated. Because for the last 2 years, we've been fighting Azerbaijan with a lot of passion in the media, but very few results. And I think this is the time when somebody within the military headquarters, the army headquarters, needs to re-look at its approach and see how to minimize threats to the country. And I think under that, severing that relationship would certainly be something that the new general needs to look at. I don't know if it's going to happen, when it's going to happen. We heard about a policy of integration of these elements. I think you can't integrate them. I mean, when you talk about integration, you set it open for a new kind of a challenge. I'm not even suggesting that we should kill all people who are involved in militant or radical activities. But there is a new formula that has to be evolved, which is between the two. And I think it's a very intense dialogue that both civil and military would need to have. This is certainly a time that we can't afford to hide behind this, that, or the other and say that, all right, somebody else has to do it. It has to, we need to use our imagination to think, this issue through. Rafi, you asked about the middle class. Yes, that's something which has evolved in Pakistan. But the middle class has a lot of its issues. The middle class is singularly, in fact, bought into this kind of a discourse. Now, I think one of the arguments that I make in explaining militancy in Pakistan, that's another thing that I work on, is that militancy and radicalism is actually the new modernity for Pakistan. It is Pakistan's modernity. I'm not looking at the age of the formula, of taking country 1400 years back in time, but this is the new modern, because the religious formula is also what empowers people in a different way. It takes away. I mean, there is in a way a class shift as far as spiritual leadership is concerned. It's no longer the peer and the feudal, which used to dominate the earlier discourse. It's now the mullah and the militant, much more accessible idea. So this is the new modern. Now, in this new modern, because part of the problem of the state, and there, I kind of connect with your question of if Pakistan's entire problem emanates from from this issue of Pakistan being a frontier state. That may be just one of the issues, but Pakistan also, because of it's also an authoritarian state, mind you. We have another authoritarian state. I mean, India is also an authoritarian state, it's a civilian authoritarian state. We are a military authoritarian state. So that's one. And the other is that the key legitimizing formula in Pakistan has been religion. I mean, we can argue till cows come home whether Jinnah wanted a state for Muslims or an Islamic state. I think it's a very polemical debate. The fact is that the idea, because it was laced with a religious identity, that has grown in its extent. So for whoever tries to become powerful, you need a legitimizing narrative, which has always been laced to religion. I mean, from Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, be it Zulfikar Ali Bhutto or Ziaul Haq or General Musharraf or whoever, Benazir, everyone, right? Now, so what it means is that the middle class it may be modern in terms of the technologies it uses. Its capacity to use the technology. But in terms of ideas, it buys into authoritarianism, it buys into this concept of religion as much as anybody else. So, and the other problem is that the new generation, I mean your generation for instance, it's a generation which has evolved, grown up in the shadows of 9/11, which is again part of the problem, that after 9/11 you have desired a kind of normalcy, you have desired a kind of image correction, thought that structural issues are too difficult to deal. So image correction is the one issue that we can deal with a little more easily. And therefore, this new middle class that you talk about says the same things. I mean, I don't see it saying things which are different. And yes, I completely agree that this grassroots movement, it's not just the military. I mean, the entire NGOization in many ways of the social space. I think it has damaged political movement in Pakistan. And today, we were laughing in Karachi that the way things are, that people will ask you that, if you have a movement, if you have some talk or something serious about grassroots issues, etc., people will ask you, educated liberal people, so to say, will ask you that, is it on Saturday, Sunday? Then definitely I'm not coming because my office is closed. Is it happening? If it's happening after 5 o'clock, which is after your office closes, then certainly they're not going to come unless they're very, very interested. So I think what has also happened is that there is a new society which has come up, which looks at, I mean, there's part of all Pakistanis, almost, not everyone, who want to be like Singapore. There is that, I mean, that expresses, the desire expresses how we have evolved as a society. We want to be neat and clean with technology, with things working, yet it's a package. What happens in that package is that in order to push forward for technological advancements, then you completely ignore what you need in terms of your politics, in terms of creating the social and political space. Trade unions, and that is something which we have inherited. I mean, this is a problem that we've inherited since the Zia days, that nobody put life back into trade unions, student unions, which created politics. And unfortunately, none of our political parties have now today grassroots presence. in an authoritarian, military-dominated political system, what happens is that you're so dependent on negotiating power behind closed doors that you forget that you actually have to reach out to people
Yes, that's true.
and build a base, you know, through which you can then interact and then dominate the conversation. That's no longer happening.
Well, we've slightly overrun our time, unfortunately, but there will be time, I think, to talk to Dr. Siddiqa and indeed to ask her to sign a book for you. We've had the privilege this evening of listening, I think, to two of the foremost writers about contemporary Pakistan. And more than that, as they talked and expressed their ideas, we've seen the logic of their thinking. We've seen how ideas that help us to understand more thoroughly what has happened in the past and what's going to perhaps happen in the future, how we can make use of these insights. I'm deeply grateful to both Ayesha Siddiqa and Fazan Rashid for that. And I would simply ask you to join me in thanking them.